Everyone. I'm Jessica Law. I'm the Executive Director at the Water Forum, and it's good to see all of you. Thanks. Regional Parks, folks, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Liz Bellis. I'm the Director of Regional Parks.
I'm Mary Murray. I'm the Natural Resource Specialist for Regional Parks.
Thanks. Kramer Fish Sciences.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Selheim. I'm Senior Scientist at Kramer. We're doing the monitoring for this project.
Thanks, Kirsten. CBEC.
I'm Sam Diaz. I'm the Senior Eco Engineer with CBEC, and I'm leading the design on this project.
I'm Jules with CBEC.
Your audio is cutting up a bit, Chris, FYI.
Chris Ball's here, assisting the team and aiding the CBEC team. Is that better?
Yeah, it is. Thank you, Chris. Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah, hey, John Hannon here. I'm a fish biologist, trying to help out however I can.
Thanks, John. California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Do we have, yeah, there's Chris.
Hey guys, this is Chris McKibben. I'm a district fishery biologist for Sacramento County with the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. Sacramento County.
Hi, this is David Boland. I'm with Sacramento County Department of Water Resources, engineer.
Thanks, David.
This is Mike Metzke with Sacramento County Department of Transportation, Bridge Section.
Thanks, Mike. And we are just having Eric Kleinfelter joining also from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Hey, Eric, are you in the meeting? We're just doing introductions. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yes. Sorry I'm late.
No worries.
Eric Kleinfelter, Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm a wildlife biologist for Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Calaveras counties.
Thanks, Eric. City of Rancho Cordova.
Hi, this is Dalia, City of Rancho Cordova Public Works Department, and I oversee the Solar section.
Thanks, Dalia. Soilborne Farms.
Hi, I'm Lacey Carlson. I'm a youth educator at Soilborne Farms. Sean, our director, couldn't be here today, but I have all of his notes.
Awesome. Thanks, Lacey. California Native Plant Society.
Wait, one more.
Oh, sorry, Gary.
It's okay. Gary Hare, I'm groundskeeper at Soilborne. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for joining. I don't think we have anyone from CNPS. I was expecting Dan, but I don't think he's here yet. Noah.
Hi, this is Ruth Goodfield with NOAA Fisheries Restoration Center. Happy to help in any kind of restoration projects and efforts in the American and beyond.
Thanks, Ruth.
I'm Barb Byrne. I'm in the water operations branch. So I'm here to learn about habitat restoration on the river. And I work mostly on sort of fulsome operations.
Thanks, Barb. I think Casey is just joining us. Our connect. I think Michelle, are you representing Sarah? You want to introduce yourself?
Who the heck am I representing? I represent the turtles. I've been working at Bushy Lake for 5 or 6 years, and I'm a professor at Sac State, and Save the American River Association has put me under their arm because they love Bushy Lake and I'm trying to restore it. We are doing ecocultural restoration, so I'm an ethnoecologist as well as wetlands and restoration ecologist, and now I've just fallen, even though I'm a plant ecologist, I've fallen in love with the Western pond turtles. So anybody who wants to do a companion project with Bushy Lake and this one, I think they go together really well.
Nice. Thanks, Michelle. And Casey, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, I'm Casey Sorgan. I am with the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. I'm their Senior Natural Resource Specialist.
Awesome, thank you. Cool, that's everybody. Thank you all again for joining. Great turnout.
Hey, Kat, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
It looks to me like another Department of Fish and Wildlife employee is on the line. Tracy Grimes, did you call in?
Hey there. Yeah, sorry, I missed my cue. I'm Tracy Grimes with Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I do salmon monitoring, mostly on the American River, but also Sacramento River.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Cool. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And we'll get into things. Okay. Everybody seeing that? Cool. Our agenda today, we got through introductions. I'll walk through some meeting protocols. I'm going to give a presentation just kind of getting us oriented to Cordova Creek and the project. Then a brief update from Kirsten on the baseline aquatic study, some discussion on fisheries. Keeping that short, we're planning on a more thorough update on at our next workshop. And then majority of our time will be discussing design alternatives led by Sam. Any comments on the agenda? Anything people want to add or change? Hearing none. Cool. So I'm recording this mostly for meeting summary purposes. I was also hoping to potentially post it or share with folks who weren't able to be here. Anyone have issues with that? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Yeah, we're gonna have presentations followed by discussion, so just feel free to speak up, use the raise hand function, chat, unmute, whatever works for you, and as usual, mute when you're not speaking. Cool. So I just wanted to get us kind of oriented to Cordova Creek with a little background on the naturalization project. Moving forward. Okay, cool. So I wanted to start off with like a watershed map, for lack of a better term. This map is by request. So Cordova Creek, I've called it a cyborg creek before because it's part natural, part human, part machine. The source of water is remediated groundwater from the Aerojet Superfund site, which comes out of a treatment plant around that red dot. It's pumped in an underground pipeline to where it discharges into this red line here. It travels about 2.3 miles down a drainage that's known as Clifton Drain, and then there's a naturalized portion, which is about 0.7 miles. So this portion of the creek was naturalized back in 2016, turned into this meandering naturalized creek. Native vegetation was planted in the riparian and upland areas. But at that time, this lowest portion, the confluence, was not able to be completed. So that's the area that we're tackling now. So in those 4 or 5 years, a lot of the vegetation has matured. It looks a lot different than it used to. And wanted to show off these photos. Some of you have seen them before, but I think it's just a nice reminder of you know, how much change there's been. And yeah, site looks a lot different, and the restoration has been really successful out there. During and after restoration, this is on the bridge that crosses the creek looking upstream. Yeah, you can't even see the water anymore. The creek is so natural that the beavers have moved into it, and portions of the stream are now more like a pond. And the beaver is a really active, important part of this ecosystem now. A little map of the creek with beaver activity. So beavers don't just build one dam; they've actually built check dams at every location where there was a riffle constructed on the creek. So really significant changes, and something that we need to continue to keep in mind as we're planning this next phase. Couple lessons learned from phase 1, or the naturalization project in the past. This is a Mary Murray quote. Cordova Creek is a universally loved, uncontroversial idea that almost died numerous times, but persevered. I really like that as a description of the creek. And the persevered part feeds into that first bullet. Partnerships build resiliency. Water Forum, you know, implemented this project with a lot of help from partners, and there were times when Safeca, other partners, stepped in and kept the creek from dying. And another lesson learned: restoration means maintenance. It's been, you know, the maintenance work that we've done out there, that Mary's done out there, has been really essential to the success of the site. And something we also should just keep in mind going forward. And again, beavers not going anywhere, and there are ecological co-engineers. So moving downstream, Lower Cordova Creek, as we're calling it, is this portion that was not able to be naturalized during this phase 1 project. It's still a steep concrete line drainage that empties the naturalized portion of the creek into the American River. And a little bit of orientation, soil-borne farms and elderberry farms, part of the American River Ranch. They're right over here. And this is the bike trail. There's a path that was built that runs across the other side of the phase 1 area of the creek here. And there's restoration, salmon habitat restoration happening throughout the Lower American River. And one of the planned sites, water forum projects, Bureau of Reclamation projects, is right in this area here. So also something to keep in mind. So getting into details of this project that we're undertaking now. We're calling it the Lower Cordova Creek Planning Project. This project is grant funded by the Wildlife Conservation Board, funding from the Lower American River Conservancy Program. Water Forum is the project manager and cost share partner. And our project team with Regional Parks, CBEC, Kramer Fish Sciences, and all of you are also partners. So thanks. Project goals, kind of thinking of this project as having 4 big goals: evaluating the baseline conditions in the creek. That's the baseline aquatic study portion of the project. Engaging stakeholders, getting good, meaningful feedback, input on the design, and then planning for up to a 65% level of design for both the creek naturalization and access improvements. Project milestones, where are we at now? had a kickoff meeting and a pre-design meeting, bringing us up to this point where we're having our first stakeholder design formulation meeting. We have 2 other stakeholder meetings, the second being in June, and then the third being a 30% design level meeting in August. So opportunities to give input at those points. Having the only on the ground work as part of the project is a soil sample in September, 65% design, aiming for February 2022. We'll submit all the monitoring data to California Environmental Data Exchange Network in May 2022. That's really when the project is wrapping up. We'll develop draft signage as part of this project to go along with the access improvements and submit all our deliverables by June 2022. So just a little overview of where stakeholder and what has been done to date. I had interviews with some folks, just getting, having some one-on-one conversations, getting some feedback, and wanted to summarize some of my takeaways from those. You can tell me if I heard you right, if there's anything to add. So heard that flows are really important, and they're also uncertain. I had conversations with Aerojet, and they're open to coordinating more with us and being a little bit more protective of fish, other aquatic species with flows, but they're working under certain constraints. There is maintenance, there's emergency shutoffs that happen. So that's something important to keep in mind. Barb, did you want to chime in?
Just a question. I don't understand anything about the Aerojet dynamics. But how is flow limiting for them? Is it a question of treatment capacity, or what?
So they're pumping water all the time. It's a huge Superfund site. They've got a lot of water to remediate, which is the main source of water in this creek. The limiting factor is that sometimes they have to shut off that water. There's emergencies where, I don't really understand, how their plant works, but I guess there are emergency shutoffs. Dahlia, I think you maybe know a little bit more about Aerojet operations. You want to?
Yeah, so I wanted to add a couple of things. So in addition to the actual Aerojet flows in the creek drains approximately 1,300 acres from city drainage. So that's basically urban runoff from like streets and residential areas that gets plumped to, pipes that outfall to Cordova Creek. And then there's definitely the Aerojet factor where, yes, you're right, Kat, they throughout the year actually discharge treated groundwater into the creek. And in some cases, we have to coordinate with them to shut off that flow so we can go in and do the maintenance of the creek or weed abatement season and that kind of stuff. So we coordinate with them very closely. It's my understanding they can't shut down their operation for more than 2 to 3 days at a time, because they have to be able to meet their volume requirements of how much they need to pump out and treat. It's a very regulated process, so they have to just be able to meet their targets. But so anyways, in case helpful.
That's very helpful.
Hey, can I ask a question? Maybe nobody knows the answer, but I'm familiar with the groundwater cleanup over at McClellan, and I think they had an anticipated end date of like 50 years. And I'm wondering if there's an end date for this groundwater cleanup at Aerojet and when that creek will potentially dry out in the future.
I did ask about that. They weren't able to give me a super solid answer, but I guess whereas other plants are seeing a decrease in the level of contaminants, they're not really seeing that at this site. So, relative relatively long, probably timeline. I think the person that I talked to, Peter, was felt like 20 years out, he was less certain that this water would be would exist, but probably
Yeah,
pretty
and
long. Yeah, go.
the last they have like a community engagement stakeholder group meeting that I attended, and the regional board said, oh yeah, it's tens of years, potentially 50 plus, maybe 100 years. It's really long time.
Thank you.
Thanks for the good questions there, folks. I'm going to move on. Talked about beaver dams with you all, with some of you, and I think I had been, I had these questions about the interactions between beavers and salmon, and what I heard was that beaver dams are a benefit to salmon, especially for rearing, and other native species, including western pond turtle. Another thing that came out of interviews was the need for a vegetation survey to inform decisions about channel alignment and mitigation down the road. There's existing native vegetation in this area, so that's something to consider. And heard lots of stories about how rich this ecosystem is. People see a lot of different birds, a lot of deer, a lot of frogs and toads and snakes. And a couple more things. Heard from folks that neighbors are important stakeholders. They're the people who walk this trail mostly, and heard that I should reach out to HOA leaders, which I did. I haven't heard back yet, but I heard you on that. And Rancho Cordova is our outreach partner. Thanks, Dahlia. Appreciate that. We're planning on doing wider outreach to neighbors for our successive stakeholder meetings. And something I heard come up a lot is this need to balance access improvements with protecting habitat. How wide we make the trails and what kind of users we're targeting has impacts on how much disruption there is to habitat. And heard from Soilborn and CNPS and other folks that we should really be targeting educational access east of the creek rather than the general public, and looking for ways to make it a good, better, improved trail, but not something that everyone knows about and wants to walk. And lastly, I think a good point that I heard was that as part of this planning process, we should be daylighting stewardship responsibility and getting to greater understanding there, and be thinking about who's going to maintain the things that we're building. Yeah, I want to pause and see if there are questions, comments. Folks who I talked to, did I hear you right? What did I miss? Nothing?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks to everyone who talked to me. It was helpful to start thinking about all of these things. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, comments, I want to move on and turn it over to Kirsten to talk about the baseline aquatic study.
All right, thanks, Kat.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, our main role in this project is really doing pre-project monitoring. So I'm going to just go over, you can go to the next slide, Kat. I'm going to just go over kind of what our what our baseline knowledge of the site was from a salmon perspective, and then talk about some of our hypotheses and kind of some of the constraints and opportunities on the creek a little bit, and then go over a few of the observations that we've been making in this initial year of pre-project monitoring. So adult salmon have anecdotally been observed in the creek. During wet water years, they've been seen spawning up in the creek. And there's sort of a question about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, I think it's to be determined a little bit, just because there hasn't been that kind of really robust monitoring of that. Sort of what is the long-term outcome of that for the embryos, for juveniles rearing, that kind of thing. And as Kat was mentioning, flow in the creek can be really intermittent. So there's this sort of uncertainty, interannual differences that happen in the creek that could really impact whether or not this is sort of beneficial. However, so the American River is really limited in habitat compared to historical conditions, certainly. And the habitat that is available is highly impacted. And so we've been doing spawning and rearing habitat restoration on the river for the last decade or so, but there just really is this sort of limited habitat limitation, especially given hatchery production and stuff. There are a lot of Chinook salmon in the river and not enough habitat. So our hypothesis and our assumption is that any new habitat that is created, assuming that it's able to, get some salmon through to out migration, should benefit the river, unless it provides an ecological trap, unless it creates a trap where, fish are spawning, they're getting stranded at some stage of their life history, either in an area of high temperatures, they can't out migrate because there's a barrier, something like that. And then, either surface temperatures or inter-gravel water quality is poor. Let's see, go to the next slide.
Ready for the next slide?
Yeah, okay. So our study questions for this pre-project were pretty basic, really. What salmon life stages are currently in the creek? And then on a related note, sort of what habitat variables are they queuing in on, and what might be limiting the success of particular life stages in the pre-project condition. So those were kind of what we were trying to tackle with this initial year of pre-project sampling. You can go to the next slide. So physical habitat conditions, we really feel like water temperature is probably driving a lot of this. There was some initial data from CBEC on water temperature in the creek. So we put temperature loggers into different areas in the creek, and I have a little map in the next slide, so I'll show you that. And then we also conducted some pebble count surveys to just look at substrate size conditions in that restored area of the creek where we're talking about improving access potentially. And that mostly fed into the design of the project. So I'll not talk about that too much, but just know that we did collect that data this winter. And then, so for biological surveys, we were really focused on spawning activity on the adult portion of the life history, and then on juvenile habitat use. So these are surveys that we're doing right now this spring, looking at habitat use in Cordova Creek. And this is kind of a sad year to do these studies, with the flows being what they were. Things are pretty, just to, not to ruin the surprise, but things are pretty sparse out there. So Kat, if you want to go to the next slide, I can kind of show you what we saw. Well, first, here's the temperature map. So we basically have a temperature logger in the very upstream end of the site, and then we have a handful of loggers both in the downstream end of the Cordova Creek, and then 2 in the main channel at the upstream and downstream parts of where it connects with American River. So that's the distribution of the temperature loggers. You can go to the next slide. So here's just a picture of what those places look like. So the very uppermost one is on the left, and then going downstream. And you can see, the main channel looks a lot different from the creek itself. And then, so the next slide. So this is the temperature data up until January. So I'm sorry, Kat, I wasn't able to append the most recent data. We had it downloaded, but I just ran out of time yesterday. But this kind of shows you basically what goes on in the different months that we're sort of interested in or thinking we might start to be seeing adverse impacts. And so you can see kind of, you know, at the end of October, beginning of November, things really do improve in the river. So sorry, just to orient you to the red line is when we, you know, when we think we might start to see some stressful conditions for spawners or for juveniles. And then 15 is sort of, you know, optimal conditions, or 15 or lower degrees are thought to be kind of optimal conditions for rearing and for spawning. So that solid red line is when like you would start to see stress. So you can see things kind of do actually get pretty good during the key part of the rearing period, which would be, you know, the end of October through December. We're actually seeing fairly good temperature conditions. And I did take a peek at the temperature data that we just downloaded, which was mid-March, and we saw a little bit of starting to climb. The highest measurement was 18 degrees. So we would expect, you know, April is probably going to heat up even more, especially in the upper part of Cordova Creek. But I'll have this updated in our next meeting so that we can kind of see that all play out through the spring and see kind of when the conditions start to get a little bit stressful in terms of temperature in the spring. The next slide. So this is just a brief that we did double count surveys, and we sent our shape files over to CBEC. So those get incorporated into the design. Next slide. So this is a picture.
Can I ask a quick question on the temperature? I understand, I mean, you can't have loggers everywhere, but in that restored area of the creek, is it pretty uniform, say topography, or are there some sort of temperature refuges? Are there some deep pools or places, or do you think those temperatures are pretty representative? It's really just about how far up are you, and it gets.
I think they're pretty representative. And Kat, actually, you can go back to the figure just so we can kind of. The temp figure. Yeah, so they're kind of tracking each other. You can see all the Cordova Creek loggers are really pretty much tracking each other. So you know, there are some deep spots, and I think the beaver dams could kind of modulate that a little bit, but it does seem like things are pretty uniform in that little stretch there. And I kind of get a feeling there's just not quite enough space for temperatures to change significantly as the water is moving through that system.
And I guess one other question on this, is it right that the upper is, I guess I don't understand like how it's coming out of the drain. I don't know if it's covered in the drain or not. So what it looks like it's getting the green line is cooler than the blue line. The green line is closer to the main stem, right?
Yeah.
So is water cooling as it goes downstream?
You can go back to the map there. So the green and the purple and the pink or the green and the pink are kind of right on top of each other, and the blue is the farthest upstream. So yeah, upper pH 1 is really the one that's kind of closest. So Kat, if you want to switch back to the figure. So yeah, the blue.
So it's hotter. Yeah, so why is it hotter?
Yeah, it's hotter. I don't know. I mean, there could be sort of subsurface stuff.
Because it's cold.
Yeah.
Because it's cold. This is this winter, and winter water will cool downstream.
Right.
And it's just there's not much difference in the summer when it's hot because they're pretty close. Yep. Maybe.
Yeah. That seems like a reasonable explanation.
That's right. Yeah, I kind of forgot what season. I was thinking I'm in like summer temperature management mode in my head.
Yeah.
That makes total sense for December.
Also there could be some runoff effects too. So like in the dry season, you see them like tracking on top of each other perfectly, and then in the rainy season, you see that shifting. So it could be something to do with that too, with sort of, you know, other sources besides the aerojet plant.
Where's the purple one? Is that in the river, the main American River? Okay.
Yep, that's in the river. Yeah, it's kind of just at the entrance.
Okay. There's a lot of tree cover in the naturalized area where there's not in the drainage. Yeah, I think that's the cooling effect.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh.
All right. Well, any other questions on the temp data while we're on the website? All right, so we can go on to the spawning. So yes, so this is a documented observation of spawning. This was actually at a pretty low flow in 2018. There was an adult Chinook spawning up in Cordova Creek. Thanks to Joe who took this photograph. So we knew that it happened, right? But we didn't have any, we didn't have any quantitative information about spawning. And so that was really our goal this year, was to look at spawning in Cordova Creek, and then we have some control sites as well, just to provide sort of background spawning densities. So that's what I'll be showing you in the next slide.
And Kirsten, that discharge, that's Nimbus discharge?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's not super surprising, and I'll show you some pictures, show you why this, why we didn't see any spawning this year. But we did see some Chinook and steelhead in the main channel. So Rossmore Bar and that area just outside of, or just downstream from where the creek comes into the main channels where we did our control sites. So we did see spawning occurring at the control sites. There were no adults observed at all in Cordova Creek, and no spawning. So, and these were all under fairly low flow conditions from, as we know, this year has been really low. So Kat, you can go to the next slide. So yeah, so this is a picture on the left. This is a picture from last May of the creek at 4,800 CFS. So a little higher flow, a little more connectivity to the main channel, although there's still kind of a barrier there. And then this picture on the right is from this January, and you can see it's a complete barrier to, to anatomy. So we're not super surprised that we didn't see much, over the spawning period. And this is, that's what it looks like now, essentially. There was that brief, increase in flow. But there is a kind of somewhat of a decoupling between what's going on in the Cordova Creek and what's going on in the main river. But when the river is higher, there is more connectivity.
What's the Cordova Creek flow? Do you know, when it's not raining, kind of thing, like base flow?
I don't know. Sam, do you know the answer to that question?
I think it's around 6 CFS.
Okay.
All right, Kat, next slide. Okay, so right now we're doing our juvenile sampling. So we've been doing strictly snorkel surveys this season. We've had really good visibility, largely due to the lack of rainfall. And so we've been doing every 3 weeks we've been going out and doing snorkel surveys. And then we've also been doing some supplemental video, really just to kind of monitor fish behavior, to document fish or lack thereof in the Cordova Creek and in the control sites. So next slide. So yeah, so we're doing another one this week. We've done 3 so far. We haven't seen any salmonids in Cordova Creek. The only fish we've seen are mosquito fish in fairly high abundance. So, it does seem as though at least this dry year, salmonids are not able to get up into the creek. And, the pictures that we had in a couple slides ago kind of, provide the reason for that. there's really not passage at the downstream of the creek under these flows. We did observe salmonids in the control site, so in the main channel during the second March survey. So they are starting to come down from the spawning reaches and rearing, at least in the main channel in this area. Now.
Kirsten, was that those recent short-term increase to 3,500 CFS out of Nimbus? Was that enough to reconnect Lower Cordova Creek?
That is a good question. The picture that I showed you before that was on the left, that was at 5,400, and there was some connection, but it was really slight. So maybe a little, but probably not significantly would be my guess based on that picture. But I don't know. We weren't out there during the pulse. So. All right, Kat, next slide. So these are somewhat old restoration predictions. This is from our scope of work. So I think we're kind of shifting away from from attracting spawners and that kind of thing. And Sam will talk a little bit more about that in the design portion of this. But we predict we might see more connectivity. We might see more salmonids in general entering Cordova Creek and using it. We might see improvements in physical habitat. So that would be sort of depth and velocity, substrate size. Potentially cover. And then water temperatures that don't reach stressful levels, really targeting that sort of late October through May, when adults are in the system, spawning, incubation time, and then when juveniles are rearing. So, so that's a really key with this project in particular, is that water temperature kind of question. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that more as we move through the process here. All right, Kat, that was my last slide. Anybody have any questions about any of the monitoring so far?
Oh, I think somebody said they thought maybe 6 CFS in Cordova Creek. What's the max discharge you might see in the creek itself? If you have a big storm, you got a lot of runoff, or if Aerojet's really pumping away. I mean, is it like 15 max? I'm not used to dealing with such tiny little creeks.
It's very large. It's a very flashy watershed, and I think immediately after construction, the creek completely broke out of its banks. So it has the ability to get quite full. I don't have a number that I can put on it.
I guess what I'm wondering about, is there ever a potential if it doesn't sort of connect to the river until, I don't above 4,000 or 5,000, if you had juveniles in there and conditions were fine, but they were temporarily stuck there, that might be okay if they're growing. Is the only way to get them out to boost Nimbus releases high, or could you also kind of scoot them out from, it sounds like maybe the Cordova Creek discharge is not ever going to be enough to get them over that barrier at the end?
Well, we would modify the barrier. The idea would be that we want this creek to connect to the river at 500 CFS. We want it to connect at low flows.
All right,
yeah,
that's
kind of one of
the next thing is going to talk about.
Yeah.
Coming up.
And I will say too, just on the topic of beaver dams with respect to the juvenile rearing. So I did a little bit of digging around after our last meeting, because I was actually pretty curious about that. And there definitely is some evidence that that juvenile salmon can move through those kind of semi-permeable beaver dams, but there's not been much done in the Central Valley on that question, or in these like super small tributaries. So I think that's actually a pretty compelling question for this project, like, because I do think that probably we need to just recognize that the beavers are going to be attracted to the flowing water. They're going to want to build there. And yeah, I think it's a real open question, to what extent the salmon can move through those barriers at any given life stage and at any given kind of flow condition. Wet versus dry years, there might be differences there. So I think that's been kind of a head scratcher and interesting question for me as I've been kind of working on this project. Yeah, they do respond to flow. I just watched a documentary about this with my son actually, and they were putting, I don't know if you guys have seen this one. It's I don't remember the name of it, but yeah, basically they use these like audio recordings to make the beavers build their dams like somewhere else where they didn't want, like where the restoration people didn't want them to build. They would like redirect them to these other places with these audio recordings of flowing water. And they totally tricked them. It's pretty impressive. So
sorry, nails on a chalkboard to beavers. They just have to stop. That's
yeah, exactly. Dolly, did you have a question? I see your hand is up on the.
Yeah, more common. We actually have a model for the Cordova Creek watershed that we'll be happy to share. And it does include volumes for what the 100-year and 10-year flows are in the creek, as well as the water surface elevation. So whenever the time is right, we're happy to share that information.
Cool.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Michelle?
I just wanted to point out that in terms of the species at Cordova Creek, I haven't monitored the Western pond turtle, but there are studies, and we are finding at Bushy Lake that the Western pond turtle enhances especially basking habitat for Western pond turtles. They're they're having new treatments now. They're divided into the northern and the southern branch, and I think they're endangered to some degree of local extirpation. So weighing turtles, beavers, and then also habitat interspersion and complexity will be complex. But the Western pond turtles are really being outcompeted along the lower American, and they probably need some help.
Yeah, and Michelle too, I should mention, we have been, our crews are trained to identify pond turtles. So they've been kind of looking for pond turtles when they've been down in the creek too. So each of the snorkel surveys, they've been keeping their eyes peeled to see if we can document that, you know, so we have some data on the pond turtles in the creek. None yet. I'll let you know.
Yeah, water form, you know, our focus is, you know, has been and is salmon, but I think this project and all our projects, we want to be multi-benefit and yeah. Other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten.
No problem.
So let's move on to talking about some concept designs. I'm going to turn it over to Sam. And Sam, I just got your 2 images here in a PowerPoint, and then we're going to move over to a mural for part of our discussion, but I'll let you just talk through things.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kat. As Kat mentioned, we met previously and had a pre-design workshop. I put a couple of concepts up on the screen for everybody to hack at and brainstorm with. And we received a lot of comments, and Kat also solicited further comments. And I went back to the drawing board and came up with 2 different concepts from what we showed in the last meeting. I revised those concepts quite a bit. So in the previous concepts, for everyone else's education here, let's see, how do I draw here? I had the channel kind of swinging way out to the left here, and we had a 150-foot bridge, and it caused a big realignment of the bike path, and we've gotten away from that idea. For one, we did a little bit of preliminary modeling of the bridge and determined that we're going to be limited to how long we can make this bridge. It's because of the way the upstream portion of the creek was designed, this bridge was present when we were doing modeling. And let's see, can you see my mouse moving now, or is it still Kat's mouse?
I'm not seeing it.
Not moving.
I'll use my words. The bridge is narrow, and in flows up to about the 2-year event, velocities increase as the flows are going through the bridge, and then anything above that, the flows get so high that they backwater at the bridge, and everything slows down upstream. And the bed sediments that we put in to keep the channel from eroding away were sized according to the velocities that we got from, say, the 2-year or the 5-year, whatever the highest velocity design flow was at the time. So if we made this 150-foot long bridge, it's going to really open things up. We're not going to have that backwater. The higher flows are going to really rip through there at higher velocities, and we noticed that there would be some sediment transport of the bed gravels that are there now. So we're going to be limited in our ability to widen this bridge. And so what I'm showing here is at most an 80-foot long span. And so that means we're not going to have to realign the The bike trail, the bridge isn't going to extend as far. I think previously now I can't draw. Here we go. So previously the bridge had extended about out to here, and then the bike path was doing a reroute like this. We're not going to do that now. So the bridge is a lot shorter, and there was an objection to tearing out all this restored phase 1 area that is west of the bridge anyway. So the positive outcome of that is that we're not tearing into that ground. There will be a slight reroute of the bike path, and we may have to do a little bit of, sorry, I'm still trying to draw, a little bit of rerouting in this area. So the impacts there to the phase 1, oops, I just got onto the elderberry farm, but this is the phase 1 area. The impacts there are greatly reduced. In the previous concepts I showed, I just varied the slope basically along that one alignment. So the 2 concepts I'm showing now are going to show you 2 different alignments. So we have alternative 1, where we're using the existing alignment, and alternative 2, go ahead, there we go, where we are still swinging the channel out to the west and creating a longer flow path and exiting in a pool downstream of the current location. So back to alternative 1, and I'll just run through the attributes of alternative 1 now. Alternative 1, we have added a path along the east side, shown by the brown line up here. Not my brown line, but there you go. Thanks, Kat. To allow access up the creek, and this is especially important for soil-borne farms and their tours to access alongside the creek. And the idea would be to connect that path to the bike path at the northern end with flagstones, so that it's not really drawing attention to the access trail and not getting overused by the public. That would lead to the bridge, which we have widened, or we're proposing to widen to allow for the uninterrupted width of the bike path in its own lane of travel, and then a separate pedestrian path on the north side of the bridge with either a small pavilion for viewing or just a widened section of that bridge. So basically a 12-foot bike path on the north side of the bridge and 4 to 8 foot wide pedestrian path on the south side of the bridge. And then continuing, I guess, on the access theme, there is a trail also that we've added to the north, extending off of an existing user trail that we would use to access down to the confluence of the creek and the Lower American River. Still looking into the design of that trail. It may not be acceptable as we showed here. It may need some switchbacks to make it ADA accessible, but that's to be determined. And then downstream, in the channel itself, we have about a 12-foot drop from the existing bed of the channel underneath the bridge to the water surface at 500 CFS in the Lower American River. And with a straight alignment, that means that we're going to need about 12 steps, 1 foot tall and 16.5 feet long. You know, we can fine tune that a little bit, but I don't think we want to go a whole lot shorter than that. Just kind of, that's a little bit of a rule of thumb. I haven't gotten deep into the fish passage design of those steps, but that's a pretty tall step. This design uses the existing top of bank and channel surface on the east slope. So the east bank of this alternative would still be a concrete bank. And on the west side, you can see the blue dashed line. That would be about the daylight of a 4-to-1 slope up from the existing channel toe. And we would lay it back and protect it with some rock and vegetation, mostly vegetation. And then we have step pools in the channel indicated by those yellow lines. As I mentioned, each of the 12 steps, there is a yellow line. Let's see, what didn't I mention here? I think we would need to create some kind of a tie-in and possibly a relocation of the existing decomposed granite trail that was designed in phase 1 to account for the lengthening of the bridge. Yes, I think that's about all the main points of this alternative. So we can move on to alternative 2 now. And so alternative 2 is very similar, except for the alignment. All of the access features are still there. The east trail to the south of the bridge is the same. The access trail to the north is swung much farther to the west. And this is just a concept. This trail could possibly be on the east side as well. However, we're trying not to disturb the east side of that channel north of the bike path. This alternative shows with the dashed blue lines the daylight of the slope coming out of the channel. So it'd be kind of a deep trapezoid, basically, to set that channel at a constant slope from the base of the bridge down to the pool where we have it connecting in the Lower American River, which is about right here. These steps would be about 6 inches each, and there are about 15 of them, so about 24 steps. But otherwise, the bridge feature is the same. The tie-in is about the same. We'd be laying back the slope basically as flat as we can and not without encroaching on the bike path. We'd retain a little bit of the slope, the existing slope in this area before we split off and it becomes more naturalized. And we would end up filling the existing channel downstream because it won't be used anymore.
Sam, is there anything magic about Alt 2 joining the American River where it does? Or is it just that you wanted to be able to slope it down more gradually and moving it that direction gave you the most space to do that?
A little bit of both, Barb. I don't know if it's necessarily magic, but we wanted to make for a longer slope and smaller steps because I should have mentioned this. One thing that we arrived at in the pre-design formulation meeting was that if we don't want to encourage spawning in the creek because we realize we don't have sufficient depth of substrate upstream, we may want to promote juvenile use of the creek. So we wanted small steps, and we haven't looked. I haven't looked in depth at what that step size would need to be, but 6 inches was what we landed on in the meeting. The location here is also at the downstream end of some existing bank revetment. So you can see that the bank is protected by riprap and gabion baskets for this portion. And then just downstream of that, there's a bit of an eddy here and a hole in this area. And in addition, there may be future habitat enhancement projects on this portion of the river. So placing the location of this channel close to another enhanced habitat area seemed beneficial. Also, putting the location downstream in this area where it's in an eddy and it's behind bank protection also helps to protect the structures that we're going to put in for this channel, and hopefully lends a little bit of stability to the exit here. So yes, it was partly due to length, or mostly due to length. We wanted to get enough of a greater length and a flatter slope to the water. And then we also wanted to try and protect the exit a little bit. In concept 1, go ahead and go back to that, Kat, please. We're going to have to possibly, even just to get these steps in at the length, at the dimensions I state here, add some fill, because I think right now, we may be able to see it from Kirsten's pictures, but the river kind of cuts in here. And if we want to get even the length that we need to build these steps out to these dimensions, we have to extend our slope into the river. And it's going to take some fill at this downstream end and up a little farther, possibly, well, we'll see. I haven't gotten that far into design, but I think it's going to require some fill at the downstream end of the channel to make it flush with this portion of the bank, so that it's not a kind of a recirculation area where we're going to get eddying that will scour out rocks. We've already seen from phase 1, when we put a lot of rocks in this area, just down at the downstream end here, there's about a 3 or 4 foot head cut at the end of the concrete. And to try and mitigate that, there was a kind of a field decision made, instead of building it to design, to just place cobbles in all along this bank and build out the slope, and make it a more gradual exit. Well, the flows the very next winter washed away a lot of that cobble. So we know that there's some action, some eddy action going on in this little pocket right here. So we would want to build that out.
Thanks.
And that covers the basic components of these two alternatives. Does anybody have any questions? We're really still looking for stakeholder input, ideas you may have to make these concepts better, things that you'd like to see, improvements on access. As we mentioned earlier, we're trying to balance access with restoration. So we don't want to put an escalator down here. But at the same time, we may be required to provide access that is built to a certain standard. Working through that.
Dahlia's got a hand up.
Oh, sorry, Dahlia, I did not look at the hands.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, maybe a comment and a question. So regarding option number 2, to me, it feels a little bit more disruptive just from grading and that kind of stuff. We did a repair project kind of way downstream from this location. And I'll tell you, we ran into a lot of site restrictions. Namely, there were some archaeological constraints with potential burial grounds for Native American tribes. And because of that, the grading was so restricted. And actually, Regional Parks was our partner on that project. So I'm sure Liz remembers, but we were very restricted on what equipment we can use, how much grading we can do, how much soil we can move around. So I think just from that perspective, alternative 1 maybe seems the less disruptive option. And potentially if you run into some, now I don't know if this issue will come up in this location, but I think it's just something to keep in mind, that, you know, maybe some research or consultation with somebody who knows more is advisable before we pick the 2 options. And then, yeah, my second question / comment is just making sure for maintenance purposes, that we're still going to be able to have access, whether it's alternative 1 or 2. And, you know, we prefer to have access on both sides of the channel. So that's the preference. But yeah, I mean, if we're going to kind of do something different, we just want to make sure that we're still able to, you know, maintain the creek as needed. So that's it.
Thanks, Talia. Yes, the cultural situations are definitely on our radar. And I do recognize that this is a more impactful alternative than alternative 1. It's kind of what we did to try and reach the goal of fish passage. And in terms of maintenance access, that's something we're going to definitely have to work into the plan. As it is now, the channel is steep and narrow, and it has relatively flat banks, so you can kind of, I'm sure that you're able to get equipment along both sides and reach in however you'd like. So if we were to widen it, that may be, I guess, more of an issue, being able to reach in. How's maintenance done now, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we have areas of the city where we have good access, and we prefer to have at least, you know, 16 feet wide access roads when possible. We prefer to have those be improved surfaces versus just, you know, gravel. But we also have a lot of areas of the city where that's not the case, especially within the American River Parkway. We have other channels that's just not the case. So we do go out there with our equipment, as well as sometimes it's just literally by hand removing, you know, invasive species and weed abatement, you know, kind of activities, that kind of stuff. So, so yeah, we're happy to work with you on what access looks like. It doesn't have to be exactly what's in the standards, but I think as long as we can at least have access. I also feel like once we do a new design for the channel, that actually helps out a lot with maintenance needs, because, you know, potentially we're not going to be doing the same level of maintenance. And, you know, especially in areas where the concrete lining is already falling apart and that kind of stuff. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll definitely work with you on that. And I'm hoping that this will be seen as an improvement. If you're going in there with hand crews right now, those walls are too steep to walk on and concrete. And that's why I was asking the access question for now, trying to figure how we can improve upon that. So we will continue this discussion.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Mary, want to do Mary and Lacey?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the maintenance that may be happening, because I've been looking for some help when for the flooding that's been happening with all the beaver dams. We haven't had any flooding this year, but last year it was a real problem. So are you saying, Dahlia, that your Rancho Cordova is on board with helping with that?
Yeah, so there's a portion of the creek that's Rancho Cordova's, and there's a portion that's Sac County's, of course. Yeah, but I'm happy to provide you with kind of a map showing what the city's portion is, and we're definitely happy to help with O&M, anything that comes up related to that. And then Dave Bolin is on from the county side, but their county O&M team takes care of the county's portion of the creek. So it's kind of a split responsibility.
Oh, I had no idea. I thought it was, yes, you definitely have the downstream portion where they're building the new project. That sounds like that's yours, right?
Well, I actually, I'm confirming some of that, because I think a lot of that portion might actually fall within the counties, but yeah, so we should, yeah, I should be able to provide you with more definitive information once I talk to the county. But yeah, a portion would be in the city area.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in hearing more, because you say, partnership builds resiliency, and I need some partners on this, on maintaining when it floods the trail. I'm looking for a partner to help me with that. So the other thing is, I am just so happy to see that the alternatives 1 and 2, and that it's not. I think this is, from my point of view, I really like both alternatives better. Alternative 2 will impact the existing equestrian trail. And so we'll just need to make sure that if that's the alternative we go with, that we are rerouting the equestrian trail and making sure that that's continuous. And continuous may mean up against the Jedediah Smith Trail, because it does use the same bridge as the Jedediah Smith Trail, but we'll have to make sure that we keep that in mind if we do go with alternative 2. And I guess one more thing I wanted to say was any trails that go right down to the river, and you guys are all well aware of this, you're going to have to think about, how resilient they'll be to flood flows. So we usually don't build trails down to the river because they will wash out. So want to think about that. And then I'm really confused about why some people can walk a trail and other people can't. So I'd like to hear more about the trail that's only for some people, but not for everybody. So that kind of raised a little red flag. So those are my comments.
Sure. I think I'm going to let Soilborne talk a little bit about who can walk on the trail. That was a request of theirs, is that there's an existing user trail on the east side of the east top of bank, south of the bike path right now that they use. And there's a concern that if you put a trail in, if you put a sidewalk in there, then it's going to encourage a lot of people to use a trail, and that may have some impact on habitat and other land use that I'm not sensitive enough to at the moment. So I'll let Lacey speak to that in a second. I had a question for you though, Mary, to follow up on your equestrian trail, fitting in between the bike path and the top of bank of this trail. Does it raise concerns for you that we would have a deep cut to this channel that close to a bend in the bike path?
It did make me wonder. It did make me wonder about erosion, and I thought, well, if Sam Diaz is thinking about erosion, and I don't know enough about it, but I would want to definitely make sure that that we're not creating a channel that's going to erode into our facilities. It seems like the straight shot is the safer one to go with, and I'm really doubtful that this creek will provide much salmon habitat. That's just me. I'm really doubtful. So I would hope that we wouldn't trade off too many other things with the hope that it's going to be salmon habitat and then have it not work. So
I guess I was asking more on a safety perspective.
Oh,
about the channel being that close to the bike path.
I would assume that it's going to be chock full of willows, and it's going to be hard to fall down into it.
That's a good point.
So, but yeah, that it would. I mean, that's just my knee-jerk reaction right now, is that it's probably not going to be a safety hazard.
Thanks.
Lacey? I'll let you comment, and then maybe we can move into kind of the pros and cons consideration. Lacey, I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. So, Mary, I can speak to a little bit about what we were thinking as far as keeping a slightly more private trail for our use, is that as we start to increase our use of this space, Soilborne is also creating some curriculum and other interpretive measures to kind of use the east side of the creek as a really great interpretive and field trip space for students. And so as it stands right now, there's a very, very limited trail that's kind of, forging your own path as you walk through on the east side of the creek. That can be very tricky for kids, especially younger kids, to navigate. And so we're hoping to have some sort of path that we can use for better interpretation of the creek, of the restoration area. And the reason that we're wanting to keep it a little bit less public than the one that is on the other side of the creek as it stands right now is just from a safety measure. The trail would be going right along our property of the farm, right along our fenced property. And as such would provide extra access onto our farm. There's been a handful of times where just from safety measures, we've found people who could be dangerous potentially for young children, or items that are potentially dangerous for young children. So we just want to develop it in a way that's accessible for kids, but not necessarily accessible or as obvious for everyone to come along down that path. So it wouldn't necessarily be fully private necessarily. It would just be encouraging the general population to use the existing trail so that the newer trail would be used a little bit more for interpretive purposes and field trip purposes. And also just so that if we're there on a field trip and we have some items set up for us on a field trip, folks are more likely to go on the existing trail, and our things could be potentially left a little bit alone if we leave them there while we're working with kids in another space. Regarding the, so we're not saying
I don't think that, I think you're being a little, I don't know, unrealistic, but I disagree that we should have a trail for some people and not for other people. But I do think that, having the access, we had a mode trail for a while. And so I do agree it needs to be walkable, but keeping people out of public spaces is, I think that would, I don't know. I think that's going to be hard to do.
Absolutely. And we're not trying to create a creek that is where it's not accessible by anyone. It's just creating a creek, a trail where the current existing trail is the one that's used for bikers and for other folks like that, so that when we're taking kids along the other trail that's on the side that our property is on, we just will be a little bit less likely to find a biker on that side who could be potentially going fast and, an obstruction for a small child or something like that.
Well, the bikers shouldn't be on any trail that isn't the bike trail itself. So that's a different, that is a different type of enforcement issue, but it's public property. Even the farm is public property. So we wouldn't be able to, if we create a trail of some sort, there's no way we can say, okay, this is just for use by Soilborn Farms for interpretive programs. It will be open to the public and the public will be there. That's just the way it is with it being the American River Parkway and public land.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're very much on the same page. We just, our only goal is just to make sure that I think also that the other trail can be kept a little bit more naturalized than the current existing trail that's a little bit more paved. Yeah.
I'm sorry if my wording kind of created maybe some confusion, because I think we are all on the same page more or less. I think the intention is to not build a trail that's maybe as wide as the other trail, just to keep it a bit more pedestrian focused, even though bikes are not supposed to be on there. But I'm sorry if my wording created confusion. It's all about public access and getting better access, not just for some, but hopefully creating good opportunities for connectivity with the American River Ranch, which is, I think, a focus of this project, is kind of enhancing the value of the space as an educational resource, and recognizing that soil-borne is a big piece of that if that makes sense.
Thank you. Can I ask one
yeah,
thing
finish
before we
your
move on?
thoughts.
So with that trail, our hope is that it would also connect upstream on the creek up to where the original restoration kind of began, so that you can kind of get the whole picture of the beginning of the restoration and where the water is coming from all the way down to where it's going to. That's just something that we are hoping for with the addition of a better interpretive trail. Along with, as you move along that trail, kind of keeping some natural interpretive points along the trail as well. Areas that we could potentially bring groups of folks down to the creek without creating impact, but where it could be a small gathering point for some students at various points along the trail. With that, there's some areas where the willows are very, very thick. And if there's areas where we can clear the willows just in a small area to bring kids down to the creek where they can view the water and get engaged with making observations, that would be wonderful. We're very excited that you're offering or adding a pedestrian crossing to the bike bridge. That's wonderful. That is something that is very, very helpful as we bring groups of people across that bridge to have a safe crossing for that. If it is possible, we were also hoping to add a small crossing further upstream on the creek. There's a large oak tree that we call Wisdom Tree that is existing right about where, between a couple of the beaver dams. If you're walking kind of upstream and you see where our fences begin, a little upstream of that, there's a very big oak tree. And we were hoping to have a little bit of a crossing there as well, so that we could create kind of a loop for some smaller trips. And then with that as well, when we're thinking about caretaking of this space, we are hoping to bring grazing animals back onto our property later this year or early next year. That we are looking into using for potential selective grazing on the east side and possibly the west side as well. Just if that is something that is possible and that everyone agrees with, but just some selective grazing so that we can kind of mitigate some of the star thistle that is growing and everything like that.
Thanks for all of those comments, Lacey. I think a couple of things I want to respond to on that. I think some parts, some of those hopes are probably I think they're out of the scope of this project. Spatially, it's really a focus on, this portion of the creek with grants. There's often, you're trying to do something new and not something that's existing. And so probably parts of that trail and those hopes are outside of the scope of this project. I think one way that we tried to get at the desire to have viewing opportunities, within the creek to view the channel without any disruption to habitat, existing willows, was this wider bridge with that platform. So I'm hoping that kind of gets at that, those desires, which I think are really great for education, but maybe a way to do that without impacting habitat. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, thank you. We're just voicing our ultimate goals here.
Yes, yeah. And I after having all these interviews, I wanted to make a slide that was like things people said that are outside of the scope of this project but should be kept in mind for the future. And I didn't, but yeah, I think there were a few of those. Mary, you have your hand waving.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a grazing area set aside on the other side, on the I call the trail side. So, and I would challenge you to find star thistle out there. So I take offense at the star thistle issue because I worked very hard at keeping the grazing area clear of star thistle. So I don't think you're going to find a lot. You'll probably, you will find a few, but it's if the goal is to keep star thistle down, we've done a really good job at that. But the way you would get the grazing animals across is we've got a kind of a low water channel, which is currently flooded from the beaver dam. So maybe if Dahlia and we all work together, we can open that back up so you can bring your animals across.
Yeah, thank you.
Should we move to the kind of pros and cons? I haven't heard from fisheries agency folks if there are, I guess, general thoughts on these alternatives and implications for salmon. I maybe solicit those comments, and then we've got some of the pros and cons, and I'll try to represent that with notes. But any other thoughts?
This is Ruth Goodfield. Just really quickly, I'll just chime in as a fisheries person. Really good, strong effort so far to come up with a couple of great alternatives. From a fisheries standpoint, I think alternative B would be like for fish passage. If I were looking purely at that, I'd say that's probably a better alternative. I think you bring up a good point. I think it was Sam, you were talking about maybe having to put fill if we went for alternative A. And I think, having a project scour out would be a concern if you were going to do that. And I was just chatting to my friend Barbara Byrne, my fellow NIMS colleague, that I think the real value in this project is in the interpretive product. You can, having kids get out there, having the signs talking about this kind of restoration and all the critters out there, whether we can get salmonids up there or not, whether that turns out to be a good idea or not. And I think we're still pretty early in the game to come up with a solid answer on that. So I hesitate to do that. But I think, overall as a creek restoration effort, this is wonderful. I think that people talk about balancing the restoration effort, access, and of course, dollars available are all going to be factors that come up here in future meetings. So I guess I'll stop there. I just wanted to say something since you wanted to hear something fishy. Oh, and then the other thing is, I think that, as far as beaver dams go, a lot of times people don't realize or think about that these beaver dams are rather buoyant in nature. They're made out of wood, and at higher flows, they tend to float a bit. And so juvenile passage is more of a perceived issue a lot of times. So I'll let that, now I'm going to really be quiet.
Thanks for your comments. It's good to hear from you.
I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand. So I'm just raising my real hand.
Just yell.
I just wanted to say about whether it's a good or a bad idea. I think we might find that some years it's a good idea and some years it's like not so great. I mean, I think, this year is a good example of a year where, we might be seeing high temperatures because we're seeing high air temperatures because we're not getting a lot of rain runoff. But, 2 out of 3 years, it might be awesome for rearing, but maybe 1 out of 3, we just might kind of need to make peace with, it's not great, but as long as we have passage out of there, the salmon will volitionally move in and out as they sort of perceive that the water quality is good or bad. So I just wanted to kind of, I think we might not want to look at it as a black and white, like, is it always good or always bad? I think some years it might be better than others. Yeah,
that's a great point. I'm sharing this little pros and cons diagram that we started. Sam and I, in preparing for this meeting, we're kind of thinking about our plan for meetings, and we have another workshop before we get to 30% design. So you know, the plan was kind of for CBEC to work on both of these alternatives and bring them a little further and then make a decision at our next meeting. But there's, you know, there's trade-offs. If there is consensus at this point, then we can focus more on one alternative or another. And I've been hearing pros and cons for both, with maybe alternative one being a little less disruptive in general, and then alternative two having more potential for fish passage. Other thoughts, reaction?
Those are the very broad conclusions of the two. And what I've put up here are very basic pros and cons. You know, the first things that came to my head as the engineer, and we're really looking for input from other folks too. And we can start to populate this chart now some more. That's great. Or we're happy to take comments from folks after the meeting as well.
Yeah.
As things occur to you, just go ahead and type them to Kat or to me, and we want to consider all your thoughts.
Yeah, well said, Sam. Yeah, there's, so you can tell us your thoughts. You can write them in here. Oh, having Zoom issues. I'm sorry, you guys. Other thoughts, pros and cons, strong feelings one way or the other?
Sam, I have a question. This is Mike Minsky with SAC DOT. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you good. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Could you please zoom in onto that alternative one? I want to take a look at the bridge alignment right there. Yeah, please. As you know, pit bridges over waterways should be treated like vehicle bridges for freeboard, scour, and overtopping. So my question here is the turnaround radius from the trail on the east side to the proposed alignment. Is that going to accommodate fire trucks, emergency vehicles, if they want to use the trail?
It's intended to accommodate everything to the degree that it does now, Mike. If that bend that I've shown on the west side is a little too sharp, then we're going to have to round it out a bit. But the trail width is intended to maintain the bridge design is intended to maintain the trail width of the path as it exists now, but only to add to the width on the south side for a pedestrian access to keep them out of the stream of bikes.
I see. And I think right now the alignment is at the skew angle, and there was no way we could get rid of the skew angle on the alignment, make it straight, more in line with the trail on the east side.
Yeah, this is a concept. We can still work to refine this in many ways. The reason that it's skewed here is one, to keep it in line with the existing bridge and not have to do so much excavation to fix the skew. And so the skew doesn't really, it's not optimal for this option, for this alternative one, but it works better with alternative two, where we want to bend the bridge, bend the channel a little bit to the west, and then we'd be coming through the bridge at more of a straight angle. So the bridge would not be so skewed.
I see. Great, thank you.
Certainly.
Good question.
Hey, Sam, this is David Bowling, Sac County Water Resources. One thought, I guess, along the line of that bridge is just thinking during construction, how that would work is if you're replacing more or less in the same location, you're going to have that bridge have to go out of service for some time. So maybe if there's a way, which probably doesn't help you, but maybe if it was shifted to the north or towards the river, I guess, the new bridge, then you could build it, keeping the existing bridge in service. But then that probably messes with your ladders there. And I don't think moving it to the south necessarily is good, because then you're going to be cutting into the existing area there. But just a thought on just the actual construction phasing of it.
Hey, David, good to talk to you after a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
That's a great comment. We'll consider that. And like you say, I think if we were going to move it, it would probably be south, based on cultural considerations.
Other thoughts? Has anyone added a sticky here? I see some added stickies. Thank you. I think someone added cons of alternative one might result in stranded reds / juveniles.
That was me, Barb, and I'm with NIMS. I don't know everybody on the call, so hi, everybody. So I'm not familiar with this area very much, so I've learned a lot just by being on this call, but it does, I guess I had one question and one comment. So my comment was that I'm just maybe a little bit kind of like Ruth mentioned, it may not be the greatest place for salmonids. And so we want to, and I think, if it's great at some time of year, so a salmonid is attracted, we don't want to then have them be stranded in a bad place. So one question I had is there, how much more sort of pre-project monitoring may there be to get a sense of, our the data that Kirsten shows that, maybe there's reasonable incubation temperatures in the winter. How is that a pretty consistent thing, or is that not a consistent thing, right? If it's good in January, but it's terrible by February, that's probably not long enough to get fish out. So those reds essentially don't provide, they just are maybe, bleeding off spawners into a poor spawning location through the incubation season at least. So I guess one question is about the pre-project monitoring, and then has there been thought that maybe if that suggests that we know that in most years, really, like maybe opportunistic use by juveniles might be something that would be beneficial, but maybe just as a matter of course, you usually want to keep spawners out. Could you do that with some sort of a weir, maybe flows might be enough to disconnect the channel, but in years when flows in the fall might be high, but we don't expect conditions to support spawning throughout incubation, you keep fish out of there.
I can talk to that a little bit. So I think this is kind of, in some ways, this is a good year to assess like how bad can it be in the creek, because it is warm and dry. I think, like I said, like the last download that we did was maybe a week ago, and we saw things certainly creeping up, but most of the temperatures were suitable. I mean, for the most part, it was 15, 16 degrees, and that's mid-March. So for Chinook, I would say what we saw this year is sort of indicates fairly good suitability in terms of temperature. Steelhead, we haven't really talked about as much. That's sort of another, their life history is different, right? Like if they come up and spawn in Cordova in March, like that, that's a kind of a different issue, because yeah, I mean, we know that by June things are pretty rough in there, according to last year's data. So I think it will be interesting to see this next couple months of data come in, and
using this as sort of a more or less worst case scenario, like how kind of bad can it get? And I agree, it would be nice to have another year where it's sort of the opposite is true, that it's a good year, and see kind of how that window of opportunity fluctuates under those different flow conditions and different temperature conditions.
It is the expectation then, and this is, the question maybe I was prematurely asking before Sam had a chance to go through the designs, but right now it seems like even if you could get, fry emerged, right now they're stuck unless it's a super wet year. But in both redesigns, the idea, it seems like, is that confluence with the American is connected at 500, and I think that's like the diversions. I don't think we're unlikely to ever be less than 500. So the idea is that there wouldn't be a stranding issue.
Right, there would be a volitional ability to leave the channel or come and go. Kind of the only stage that would be really stuck is the eggs. Incubation would be, but that's sort of the coldest time of year, so that's when you wouldn't really expect to see at least surface temperature issues anyway.
Don't like to call people out, but Chris McKibben, did you want to chime in at all? Because I think maybe you have some concerns that are similar to Barb and Ruth's.
Yeah. I've just kind of been sitting here listening. Barb has the same concerns that I do and my group does. Pat, do you feel comfortable pulling up the Word document I sent you earlier today for the group? Thank you. After our, I haven't been involved with this group other than the meeting prior to this one. Hearing the project and its description, I brought as much information as I could back to my work group. Fortunately for me, I have 3 professionals who are extremely involved and experienced with the American River. My duties are much, I guess, more umbrella. I have a greater geographical responsibility than just the American, and that's why it was nice to have Mike Healy, Janine Phillips, and Tracy Grimes give me information. And so based on the first meeting, I provided as much info as I could to these professionals, and this was the feedback that they gave me. Rather than regurgitating it verbatim myself, I felt the best idea would be to give this group their comments directly. So you'll see here, some of them are similar to Barb's concerns. But from the department's standpoint, I feel like the department long-term, if this becomes a salmon fishery, will be, probably the primary agency involved with this river and the fishery. If the project goes forward and creates fish passage. I don't know if it's best for this team to go through these questions and comments right now. Maybe the best idea would be to distribute these questions and comments to the group, and next time we meet, we can discuss them. Or, I have time, I can go through these right now too. I don't think many of these are going to be too surprising to anybody. But I think a lot of, the department's concern is what is this going to do to the fishery long term? I have, personally speaking, if things go wrong here with salmonids, the public is going to be calling me. The department is 99 times out of 100 the first entity the public goes to, I think. And so if there are poaching issues or if there are stranding problems, if fish make it past what we think is the barrier on the top side of the restoration project, and fish make it into people's backyards, I'm going to be getting phone calls. Personally speaking, I deal with this and many other tributaries in this area. It's a complex issue to deal with the public, whether they're upset or concerned or sad. You can pretty much guarantee you're going to get that full spectrum of concerns and emotions. So, you know, in general, I said this in our last meeting. In general, the department is always supportive of fish passage and enhancing habitat. I think you know, even if this were a situation where it was, you know, 2 years good and the 3rd year bad, I think even then the department will probably support enhancing habitat and fish passage, and particularly education as well. But you know, these I think are echoed in my peers' statements here, and you know, each one of these biologists kind of took it in their comments in their own manner. You can see Janine felt like pros and cons were a good idea. Mike Healy spoke on kind of the history, while Tracy Grimes is, I won't speak for Tracy, but because I think she's on the call. That being said, Tracy is going to be involved with the American River and salmon management, and there's implications for her studies. You know, the department does, well, in some years does the carcass surveys on the American, and in general is responsible for creating a escapement estimate for the lower American, and that directly coincides with our hatchery management and ocean fishery management as well. So, you know, adding a half mile of spawning habitat doesn't seem like a bad idea to folks who want to see more salmon produced and habitat enhancements. But it is it's a big subject for salmon management. You know, there's implications with our ocean enhancement program, or I'm sorry, our ocean salmon program, which dictates which helps provide and then helps provide information which dictates you know, the commercial catch, and so, you know, it's more data, which is generally, you know, I'm a big fan of data, but the point is this is a kind of an extra data set that the department will have to you know, maintain in the long run. So you know, these are I guess a lot of the concerns the department has, and I don't think that our program is made up our mind yet. I think we're hopeful for this project. So I think we're kind of leaning towards the pros and looking for some information that helps flesh out the pros. But some of the cons may weigh heavy in our determinations and opinions. So yeah.
Thanks for voicing those, Tracy.
Yeah, if I could just chime in for a second, just to give a caveat on these comments that Janine, Mike, and myself provided. I think we may have received from Chris in a previous meeting different alternatives, because I remember seeing alternative 2 as one that aimed to block salmon passage completely. And so, okay, thank you. Yeah, I see you nodding.
Yeah, sorry, that was confusing.
So I want to provide that caveat for people that are reading those comments, that that's what we were looking at when we provided those. But yeah, like Chris said, I don't think we've fallen one way or the other. I think, like what Kirsten was saying, there may be some good years, there may be bad years. my main concern, just from being in this meeting, because I haven't been involved with this process up until this point, I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot from this meeting today. My main concern really at this point is the fact that Aerojet could control the flows and just shut off flows during emergencies. So just for that reason alone, I personally am not in favor of providing salmon passage, but I won't speak on the department's behalf. That's just my personal opinion.
Thanks, Tracy. I thought that is an issue. Yeah, and appreciate you talking with your colleagues, Chris, and yeah, appreciate you all thinking about this, being thoughtful about this project, learning more about it, and advising us.
One of Janine's comments in that Word doc there was more temperature data. I agree that this year being a bad year is actually fantastic data. It gives us really our bottom end expectations. And so if we can get some data on a wet year, a normal year, that will be enlightening too. And so Janine, I think Janine's one of her recommendations was continue that temperature monitoring before a decision is made. But I don't know if that pushes the project out 2 years or more. So
yeah, the way this project was designed, it's kind of 2 years of monitoring data, but the design is moving forward at the same time. So a little tricky there, but I don't know, something we need to think more about. And whether to move forward. It is up to a 65% design. The project is not being built immediately after that. So yeah.
I mentioned briefly that if salmon were to get past the what's thought to be a barrier, that they would essentially be in people's backyards. How confident is anybody that that's actually a barrier on, say, a wet year where numbers of Chinook move in? I tend to think that it's maybe not as much of a barrier as possible, as these fish are more elusive than we give them credit for. I think that after they move up past the restoration area, that conditions become poor quickly. And fish will not just stop and turn around. They're going to basically go all the way up as far as they can, with high flows. So that's one of the big questions I have is how tight is that fish barrier, we'll call it.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Sam, you had a hand waving. Did you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think that in the phase one, Kirsten, you may be familiar with this. I think that Joe looked at this from Joe Mars from Kramer. He looked at the potential of fish to pass a pretty significant challenge that's just upstream of the phase one project. There's a hydraulic jump at the bottom of a very steep section of channel, and I think he found that was somewhat of an impassable barrier.
Yeah, I can get that information from Joe, but I think that's the gist of it, is that, yeah, the sort of hydraulics and the depths and the run, like yeah, it's too much of a vertical jump for the horizontal sort of run and the depths that they have ahead of.
Yeah, it's a steep section and it's long, and it's very fast.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have some reference photos for that. One thing I'll say is that several of these tributaries in urban areas are, flashy. Sam, you mentioned that earlier, but the kind of the atmospheric river over an urban area with concrete and drainage can make flows incredibly high. And I've seen fish move into these urban environments through storm drains that, you know, people thought fish couldn't get through. So it's just maybe it'd be nice for us to flush that one out. I think that's a big hangout for the department.
I want to say something. The as far as the salmon getting up past the perceived obstacle, I got lots of photographs of the spillway, the area where that drop off is. There's erosion going on the bank on the it's north of the bridge, east of the creek. There was a tree that was slowly falling down there, and it finally settled on into a position where it allowed the water to back up and form a pool. And I think that may have something to do with the salmon going up in there, because I have lots of pictures of that. I mean, I got ridiculous amounts of photos from 2.5 years to 3 years of the project. And yeah, I mean, that's really all I have to say about that. That's probably how they got up in there. But I've seen salmon in there many times in the spillway area, and as far as up in the creek, I've seen them up there a couple of times too.
Right. There's lots of anecdotal. Thanks, Gary. There's lots of anecdotal evidence of fish being able to get up the creek into the creek, even while it was just a concrete line channel. And the impediment that I was mentioning is actually upstream of the point where at the south end, we tie back into the concrete channel. So just upstream of where we tie in there, we place some large rocks as an energy dissipator, and then we transitioned back to the existing concrete drainage channel. And then that channel really takes off and goes steep up into the neighborhood. And that's the impediment. So that 4-foot drop at the bottom, yeah, they can get up that, and they get up the channel at the downstream end, which is also surprising. But yeah, so that's a good question. How do they get up the downstream end of the channel, but they can't get up the upstream end? I'm not savvy enough on fish sprinting behavior, but we did look at that previously.
Yeah, and I can ask Joe about that. I wasn't part of the project during that time, so I'm not super familiar with the numbers on that, but I can ask Joe if he has that analysis.
Well, we're right up here on 2 o'clock. Thank you all for staying the full 2 hours for a great discussion. I will be putting together a meeting summary, and I'll send that out with next steps. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if anything comes up.
Thank you, Kat.
Yeah, thank you, Barb. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for all your input, and don't be afraid to give more.
Yep.
Conversation isn't over.
Thank you.
This is
very
good conversation.
educational.
Good
Thank you.
conversation. Thanks a lot.